Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I have a guest who is very special to me, Nicole Wright. And Nicole is currently in the UK, and she works with Sullivan Stanley. And she is the European partner for S&S and has been busy building the, as they call it, the CXO community. So the chief CFOs, CIOs, company leaders here in the Netherlands working on the expansion there. And I've been delighted to be part of that community from very early on and have been working with her on the market entry strategy and making a lot of introductions and just been having such a good time with Nicole. And I'm delighted that she could make some time for the podcast as well. So Nicole, thank you so much for joining. And I would love to hear how you describe this as well. What is it, Nicole, what is it that you do and why is it that you do what you do?
So as you said, I'm a partner for Sullivan Stanley. We're a change consultancy, one that's been born out of a real desire to disrupt traditional management consultancies and help businesses today thrive in the next decade. So my background is very much in exec headhunting. So working with CIOs and chief technology officers and chief operating officers to quite often build an interim team of experts to be parachuted in to help the business go through a period of change. So having spent a lot of time in boardrooms and being really privileged to do so, I kind of understand a lot of the challenges that organizations face when they're going through change. And I love my time doing headhunting and recruitment, and I've worked on global roles with big brands. But I wanted to try to do more. I felt like the recruitment model was dying, and actually it became very difficult to be strategic and not transactional with organizations and with execs the way that I was used to being. And I kept bumping up against this company, S&S, in the UK, and they kept beating me out to work. And it was a case of go out on your own and set up yourself, or if you can't beat them, join them. Mm-hmm. And I was introduced to Pat, who's the CEO, by a headhunter who placed me in my last gig, and he just said, "You guys are either going to get on like a house on fire, or it's going to go nowhere." The former was the case. We just got on really well. And so Pat's ambition has been to build this consultancy, to challenge the big four, to have experts like me who understand how to build teams, work with practitioners hand in hand and exec teams to really start to challenge how companies go about change. Do you need to do a big multi-year big bang transformation with Accenture or Deloitte, or actually can you work with an organization that can upskill your team, design the future, co-execute, co-strategize, co-execute, and then exit gracefully, but be there in the future when you need help. And the whole model for me just clicked. So I'm a partner for Europe. S&S has been going for 4 years, very successful in the UK, grown significantly. But in my last job, I spent a bit of time working with clients in the Benelux region, and felt that it was the right time to take S&S to mainland Europe. So my job is really to work with execs in firms large and small in the Benelux region to understand what their challenges are, and to help them, change, adapt, flex, pivot, and really thrive in the new decade. So spend lots of time working with executives who are clients, but equally love networking. I'm a real connector. Love moderating events, and quite often find myself, heading up roundtables, talking about things like exponential leadership or climate change and sustainability. And those types of conversations really enthuse me about what I can do with clients can really help shape the future of work. So hopefully that answers the question.
And as we just experienced, your passion and enthusiasm and energy is extremely high, and I'm just oftentimes in awe in how much you can get done in such a compressed amount of time. What motivates you to do this? Like, what is the why behind the why here? And I've been working with you for a year, and I'm we haven't had that conversation yet. So I'm really curious.
Yeah,
What is the fuel that's behind all of this fire?
so you probably can tell I'm from Scotland. So my family are very much working class. My mum's a nurse. My dad built his own company from the ground up, which is a building company. My grand's a cleaner in a hospital, and I guess I kind of came from a very working class background where my mum and dad worked hard for everything. My dad built a business from nothing. He was very entrepreneurial, and then I went to a private school, loved it, really academic, really sporty, and that's where I just became a kind of super competitive person. But I've always been, even as a young child, the kind of person who likes spending time in adult company and talking about, more kind of adult conversation. So I think I've always been a really personable, chatty individual. So designing a career that revolves around speaking to people, being empathetic, understanding what some of their big challenges are, and then agreeing that I'm going to be the person that goes the extra mile and helps them is just something that's really come naturally to me. So I think there's a lot about, working class roots, coming from a family that just gets stuff done, that has a real iron will, and also just having a desire to just do better. I think, having been in headhunting and recruitment, there's a lot of mediocrity, there's a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. And what always kind of set me aside is if I say I'm going to do something, then I'll do it. And if I can't, then I'll be really honest about the fact that I can't, and here's why, and here's a different solution. So the drive for me has always been actually doing something that no one's done before. I've never taken a job where I've taken over a team. I've always gone to business to set up a new division in a new market, or a different set of clients that they wouldn't normally have. And I think I've always liked the challenge of doing something that's not already being done. To do it in a way where I get to just talk to people all day, meet people.
Well, wait a second, Nicole. You're bringing the Sullivan Stanley to the Netherlands and the Benelux region, and that's just a consultancy. So that's nothing new. Or is it something? Is it something different?
It's definitely something different. So,
I know that. That's why I know that. I'm just tickling you a little bit. That it is a different way of looking at transformation and change, and somehow, amazingly, in just a few short months, and just going into the whole Corona COVID, you've established multiple communities of over 100 people each, at different levels of management and executive levels that are passionate about this. So, what is it that's unique here that is so attractive for so many people?
So I guess you can look at it through a few different lenses. We kind of have if you imagine like an infinity figure of 8, but actually kind of a triple infinity. We talk about clients, community, and then associates. So if you're an exec who has spent their entire career client side as a permanent employee, what we found is that a number of those people want to have a different relationship with work now than what they've had in the past. And actually the journey into being a portfolio executive, where someone, for example, who's worked for ABN AMRO or ING or Philips for a number of years, can take all of those experiences and perhaps start to go into other organizations where they can coach, mentor, upskill and advise. So you have this movement of permanent knowledge workers away from the 9-to-5 gig into the space. And then at the same time, on the community aspect, there's lots of events, but some of them are very much consulting led, where there's a vendor agenda. Sometimes it's very difficult to have a low ego conversation where you can just get things off your chest, share your experiences. And actually, a lot of execs want to help people through situations that they've been through before. And from a client perspective, actually, you don't necessarily want to buy a playbook, or you don't want to buy into a 3-year transformation because things change really quickly. So when you add all those things together, experts wanting to consult in a different way, being fed up of buying playbooks, organizations kind of tiring of, you won't get sacked if you hire the big 4. They actually want to get results. And by working with an organization that's full of people like them who have been client side all of their careers, who've succeeded and failed and have the scars and battle wounds, and just actually now want to really deliver, but also as well have a community they can hook into where they can speak to others that are going through the same thing. Community first, commerce second, socially conscious consulting, and doing good by doing the right thing. I think the world's just ready for change. So yeah, it's a consulting organisation, but by another name, and certainly with a different ethos.
Yeah, it certainly feels like a community to me. And in full disclosure for people listening, I think I personally fit in a couple of those different roles, meaning if I was in a CIO, CTO role, I would definitely call Nicole to help with transformation strategy and execution, for sure. Also, in addition to coaching through Ebullient in my film work, I also do interim jobs and project jobs. And through that, I consider myself an associate. I'm even called a lead associate sometimes here in the Netherlands for SNS. And that's just been joyful to work very closely with Nicole on getting that, that proposition landed and adapted to the Dutch market. And we've also used the simplicity scan a little bit to, with not only Nicole, but other people in SNS to orient on, how does that model actually work over here? Because it's nearby geographically, there's a body of water in between, but culturally it's a bit different as well. And having lived here for about 20 years, I'm certainly not Dutch, but I have a bit of exposure to it. So it's, so I'm definitely a fanboy of Nicole and SNS. So how did you get it done? So many people ignited onto these communities, events, masterminds. Somehow you're able to open doors and get people to answer their phone and take note. So please tell me your secret ingredient.
Secret sauce. I think in the first instance, in my experience, executives the world over are just really used to being sold to. So my initial approach is never to sell anything, because I really, from a cold approach, don't know anyone apart from what you can kind of garner on LinkedIn, or what someone who might have told you, or what you could read on a company report. It's just really difficult. Why would you try and sell something to someone without speaking to them? So I think my initial approach is very much, I'm Nicole, SNS business who do this. And I think initially the community approach really works. So, we run these executive communities. These are some of the events that we've got, and we're really lucky. We've got a fantastic digital setup. So if you look at SNS's YouTube page, you can really quite quickly get a view on some client testimonials, but a lot of different events we've run. So whether it's a Future Business Summit, which we've done a number of times in the UK, we were actually supposed to be doing our first one in the Netherlands in April, and linked to Formula One. COVID had other ideas. But really quite quickly, you can get a sense from a number of execs around what it means to be part of a community, what types of events we do in the UK and in the Netherlands. There's some associate kind of videos that talk about, why they've come to work for SNS, and some client ones as well. So I think what makes it really easy for me is the fact that we've got a lot of content that we can share with people up front. So it's quite soft that, this is what I do. You can see it in my profile. Here are some of the events that SNS do, and this is what we're all about. If you think that might be of interest, either as a potential portfolio exec, or someone who's maybe a little bit sick of working with the same kind of partners in your company, or if you just want to be part of a community of peers where you can share experiences, get some advice real time, and come to some events, whether that's online or in person, then let's have a conversation. So I think that my approach is genuine. I think I'm pretty warm, pretty authentic, and share that in common with everyone in SNS. It's just about really understanding people before you even try to offer anything. And there are some people who will only ever be part of a community, but they've got really great ideas and they're a contributor, and that's absolutely fine. There's some people who want to change their life and be an associate, and we can coach them through the journey. And there are some people who are just saying, I just need help. Can you help? And there's that kind of consistent journey. So I think in the first instance, it's just like, can we just get to know each other? Like, can we have a call? And if you're an exec getting, 100 cold emails or in-mails every day, maybe that's the one that you might listen to, because it's less forced. And it's, authentic.
Yeah. The thing that really resonated with me, and I think this goes back to late last year sometime, that there was a small intimate dinner setting, and Darren was over, Darren Linden, and he was giving his presentation, his passion about basically comparing punk rock and change, I think.
Yep, that was it.
And it was like, this is interesting. This is different. Okay. This is not what I expected, being invited to a, consultancy dinner. And then other events, which I also thought was delightful, is, you did a bit of some introduction and some welcoming, but then it was community members just presenting their stories and their passion. And that was also great. And you have also stepped in and became an exponential leadership expert, because we had the bit of a round table, I guess in January, February, I don't know, brought about 15 people into a room for a couple hours and thought deeply about what does leadership mean in this time of exponential technologies and exponential business models. And that evolved into what we call an orange paper. I'll put a link to that. You can download that for free. And even though we presented that many, many times, and the even though you're technically in sales, you're so much more than that, I think. But you, the last presentation we did, which was a 90-minute presentation, you presented a whole chapter of that as well. So it was just, because someone wasn't able to join it, you just stepped right in there and you owned that. So what I love about it is it's community, it's content, it's helping, and then followed by commerce. So you mentioned COVID and Corona, and I know a bit your financial plan, and basically that has cocked that all up, I think, because it's, not being able to come over and basically people can't meet up. How's that worked for you or not worked with the whole Corona? Because I know it's been tough, but I'm curious, what is your response to the Corona challenge these days?
So I think personally, initially I struggled because, as I mentioned to you, I have built a career of just spending time in front of people. So I've never usually been in the office. I've usually been a bit of a nomad, spent my time out meeting, clients, associates, candidates, whatever you want to call it. So initially I found it quite tough personally just to make the adjustment. And actually I was looking at apartments in Amsterdam the week when lockdown happened. So I was hoping to have a foothold locally, and everything just changed. But I think I'm a very resilient person. So I'll always stick with it. And SNS as well did quite a lot to really help everyone feel still part of the business. So we were doing, like quizzes and yoga and like kind of water cooler chats. So I think all of that helped. I don't think it's ever going to replace for me being in a room with someone. I think there's just the magic that if you go meet someone for coffee, you might end up chatting for an hour and a half, 2 hours, or for a lunch or for dinner. And it's that kind of, a lot of communication is not in what you say and how you say it. It's body language, it's contextual clues, it's being in the room and kind of feeling the feel. So it's not easy growing a business in a new territory, but doing it remotely slightly harder. What's made it less difficult is the fact that everyone's in the same situation. So the playing field has been leveled, and it's a real equalizer. And actually, I guess maybe in hindsight, I could have done more upfront work remotely, and then come and spend more time in person. But we're working on a strategy to get me back out on a regular basis, and that feels really good. So socially distant activities, maybe some golf, some lunches, some dinners. But yes, I think the phrase I've used is Corona coaster. So there's been some extreme highs and some extreme lows, and there's not been a lot of middling. So and that's only a recent thing where it's really started to feel like I've got a grip on it personally, and it started to feel comfortable. But otherwise, it's been a bit up and down. I don't know, like how you felt about it, how you've dealt with it.
Well, for me, it's been very much a family experience. So with two boys, 10 and 11, we actually decided to keep the boys away from school even before the government, just a couple of days before the government decided it. And then we made a bit of a plan, a schedule to try to bring some structure to the boys, so it's not just complete chaos. Also, not a holiday. Set up that the school responded really well with the the distance learning and those types of things. We have gone through and basically cleaned out the entire forest, picking up trash because we wanted to get ourselves and the boys out of the house. And I've ordered these grabbers and stuff. And that's a whole funny cultural story there that I'll tell anyways because you asked me. But the not long ago I was pulled over by a forest ranger type guy, and he scolded me for picking up trash on the side of the road. He said it's not allowed. You need a city permit and stuff. And I was like, okay, this feels odd. Yeah, my Dutch isn't perfect, so I might have lost some of the words, but the growl on his face was certainly telling me. And then we called the city, and they had no idea what this person was talking about. And then they were so thankful that they actually brought extra grabbers, 3 of those big plastic rings to hold the bag, and a bunch of heavy duty bags, and gave us a number to call whenever we do it so they can come pick it up. So it was like, wow. Okay. Clearly there was some miscommunication out there in the forest on the side of the road, but,
that's cool.
And also for me, of course, Corona, gave me an opportunity to really launch Ebullient. And part of that journey was also using the Simplicity Scan with you and Matt and other people from SNS to, I'm not sure if it's so much get your thinking straight, but get my thinking straight on what it is you were doing. So I'm curious, how did you experience using the Simplicity Scan, reflecting your business and talking about it with other people in your organization?
Well, if you remember, you ambushed me. Not kidding on. Well, we were sitting having lunch, and you were drawing out this grid, and I wasn't really sure what it was. I thought it was some kind of strange Gantt chart methodology. But you sat and took it through, took myself and Matt Stanley, who's our head of client services, through that process. And as much as you've been very close to SNS, and Matt and I are in the business, it was interesting to see where some little things came up where there was gaps. And when you have a visual on a one page and every box is full except one, all of a sudden it becomes immediately clear that there's something in that. Like we have to talk about that. So I think it was really thought provoking for me personally, especially because SNS, as you've said, in the UK is, it's still a scale up business. It's not 100% mature. We're always in beta mode and we're always testing and learning. And then with bringing in the business in kind of, Benelux region, predominantly the Netherlands, there's things that are different culturally, socially, with clients, commercially, the way people are used to interacting. And so I think it highlighted for us where some of those differences were, where there were some real kind of synergies and similarities, but also you don't know what you don't know. So it gave us some areas where we had to clue up and ask questions of people like yourself, people in the group, get some expertise, and really sharpen the pencil on the proposition, what was different, what was intrinsically the same, and what was the path forward. So yeah, I think it was a bit of an epiphany. So one of my favorite words, epiphany, a moment of illumination.
Epiphany.
Yeah, it was like an aha type moment. So yeah.
I remember that now. It was because Matt Stanley was coming over. He's head of delivery, or whatever the title is, but he's in charge of getting stuff done. And he was going to come explain how SNS gets stuff done. And I remember I asked for a piece of paper, and then I just sketched out the 15 blocks. And as he was talking, I just started writing. Whenever anything came up, I put it in a block. And then towards the end of the lunch, I said, well, here's some bits that I don't understand, and here's some bits, and then we actually converted that to the formal canvas later. So that was fun. That was I remember that. So yeah. So speaking of getting stuff done, Another thing that I also like and appreciate about the SNS method is you don't have to sign up as a client to this ginormous, expensive, risky, horror transformation 3-year thing you're going to choke and die on. You have it chunked up into these smaller blocks. Can you share a little bit on the vision behind that? Because that's something I quite appreciate about the engagement method.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got what we call a steel thread methodology, which is really a circle. And at the beginning of it, it's really asking clients the question, do you understand or how do you evaluate, how do you know the point at which in your organization that change programs fail? And the reason I ask that is that what we know now today is that 84% of all transformations fail. And then on top of that, 53% of any change program ends up running 189% over budget. So what you've got is a trend where 7 years ago, McKinsey said 70% of transformations fail. Now today, in a more volatile world where you're having to react more quickly, we're getting worse at change instead of better. So the very first thing we like to do with an organization is go in and really baseline and understand what the change maturity looks like in the business. And more often than not, it's an alignment issue with the senior leadership team. Mm-hmm. So we've developed over 4 years a tool and methodology called Change Ready 6. So it looks at the 6 different foundations of change, the things that we think are really important to get right. So at the top end, you're looking at strategy, leadership. You're also looking at customer value, delivery. And we take these 6 different factors, hence Change Ready 6. And we do a number of assessments with 20 execs or kind of senior leaders across your business. So what we start to get is not a biased point of view, but really the wisdom of the crowd. And then over a 7-day period, we do those assessments. And then we play those back in an exec session with the board. And there's usually a couple of kind of, like we said, ping aha moments. Mm-hmm. We did it with a client. Sorry.
Epiphany.
Yeah, epiphany. Yeah, exactly. And we've done it with a number of clients where they feel we're really aligned. But what ends up happening is in that discussion, it's not the case. So then ultimately anything that funnels down into the business is doomed to failure. So Change Ready 6 is really the cornerstone of any client engagement that we do to baseline maturity of change. And then we use it as an ongoing assessment. That's 7 days. And then we usually do after that a client immersion. So what have we learned across these 6 factors? Let's do a workshop with some of the experts in our change society. Best place to give you a point of view. And that can sometimes be a half-a-day workshop, or it could be, 4 or 5 days, depending on the scale of the challenge that the organisation is dealing with. And once we've got a clear view on that, a clear line of sight about where you're trying to get to, where we have to remediate, where you might need a strategic insertion of capability, what the requirements are to coach, skill and mentor, we then tend to go into 90-day value cycles. And what that means is that every 90 days, we're accountable to deliver the organisation an outcome or a series of outcomes. So as you said, you're not signing up for 5 years because no one knows what the future looks like in 5 years. It might be the programme takes 12, 18 months, 2 years, but we've got these 90-day breakpoints and these 90-day evaluations and outcomes, which keeps us really honest and allows the client to stop, pivot, or continue. And quite often that means parachuting in teams, accelerating outcomes, and then we're monitoring that on an ongoing basis through Change Ready 6. So yeah, it's about small teams of experts who have been client side their whole career, really closely working with the exec team of an organisation to co-create, challenge, and co-execute the change and kind of kill off this idea of 3 to 5 year transformations and get organizations and the operating model, the ways of working and the culture with the right capabilities that they can start to deal with constant change on their own. And then we're only needed on really specific specialist items rather than, being integrated in the business from now to time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And what is your dream? Because you're responsible for bringing this movement, if you will, this mindset of change to the Netherlands.
Yep.
If you roll forward 6 to 12 months, what is Sullivan and Stanley Benelux or SNS Netherlands? What does that look like to you?
So, a couple of different things. For me, I would like to have 10 kind of avatar clients. And I guess what I mean by that are organizations that from, the last 6 months until that point, we've taken on that journey, and they can stand up and say, this is the way that you should be doing change. So success stories of organizations who we've fundamentally been able to help thrive through this period and beyond, who can stand up and say, this is the way things should be done. I think I'll feel like I've been successful if I can do that. I also would like the community to continue to grow. As I said to you at the top of the call, we were due to have a summit with around 200 execs, and it was all linked into Formula One. So I'd absolutely love it if this time next year there was the first Dutch Grand Prix, and actually be 36 years, and we'll be kind of standing in the paddock watching Max Verstappen go head to head with Lewis Hamilton, with a bunch of those clients with a glass of something, saying, probably Heineken, saying, hasn't this been successful, and wouldn't that be fantastic? So those two things would definitely be front and centre of my list. And maybe in a slightly longer time period, I'd like to have the opportunity to go and do something similar again, because as I said to you, don't like to sit still for too long, like the challenge of doing something new. So perhaps in 2 or 3 years, when the Benelux region's thriving and doing very well, there'll be a person that I can hand over to, and I can go and try and do it somewhere else, somewhere new. So that's a dream for me, and I'm pretty sure that's the dream for SNS as well.
Outstanding. I love it. So last question, unless you have anything to add, but if there is, a executive of an organization that's going through change, or well, they all are, and they're really triggered by the style and the method, what's the best way for them to engage with the community?
I think first of all, have a chat with me. So an initial conversation, just to find out a little bit about what they're going through, talk to them about what the community is, make sure that resonates with them. More than happy to also make some introductions to people in our business, or people in the community who might be able to help first off. But I think, as an initial filter point, just getting to know people is important, and it's not extremely exclusive, and you have to be a certain type of person. But at the same time, people invest a lot of time and energy and effort to be part of the community, and we want people who are going to contribute when they can. So we also want to make sure that the people who are interested, understand what it means to be part of the community and share some of the values and ethos that we've got. So a call or a Zoom or a FaceTime with me is a great first point of call. And then I guess take it from there.
Lovely. And in the show notes, I'll put sullivanandstanley.com, which is the website, and you can find Nicole. She's at Nicole J. Wright on LinkedIn. I'll put both of those in the show notes. And if you're triggered by this, and if you're thinking differently, or if you're seeking to think differently about making change happen better moving forward, then get in touch. And if you're I'm about to say lucky, but maybe unlucky, you might actually have me on one of those discovery sessions or immersion sessions, and maybe even working on a project, because in my portfolio, I do corporate work, like the SNS does, and I'm delighted to be connected that way. And then my coaching and filmmaking as well. So outstanding. Nicole, thank you so much for joining. I really, really appreciate the time. And I'm looking forward to continuing the journey with you over the next months and year.
Thanks, Chris.
Learn more at ebullient.com/podcast.